producers, when you meet with some folks in the industry, they don't necessarily feel great about prospects. I actually feel good about prospects. I think there are great opportunities for pork in the future, but you need positioning. You need a strategy. Yeah, you need to connect with the consumer.
Welcome, everybody, to the Swine at Canada podcast show. I am Dan Columbus, and I will be your host for today's episode. And with me today, I have Dr. Sylvain Charlebois, who is director and professor at the Agri-Food Analytics Lab in Dalhousie University. Welcome to the show, Sylvain.
Well, thank you.
Yeah, pleasure to have you on. Looking forward to the discussion today. I'm sure people know who you are, but just in case there's somebody that's living under a rock somewhere, I will ask you to give you a little introduction of yourself and, where you've been, where you're going, that type of thing.
Yeah, so first of all, I'm an appointed faculty member at Dalhousie University in Halifax. I've been here for 8 years now, and before that, I was actually in Guelph. And before that, I was actually in Saskatchewan. That's where I started my academic career. So I've been an academic for about almost 25 years now. And my area of expertise is food distribution policy. And here at Dal, I manage a lab. It's called the Agri-Food Analytics Lab. And so we collect data, we forecast, we publish reports, both in English and French, on a variety of different topics. Our most recent topic is barbecuing, essentially asking people what they put on their barbecue, how many times are they barbecuing, has food inflation impact their choices when it comes to meats and things like that. So we're always curious to know more about what Canadians are thinking about when it comes to food, generally speaking. And of course, we've been working with different governments. Right now, we're working with the Ontario government on the Ontario Food Terminal project. We're also working with the federal government with a few agencies there. I've testified before Parliament over 20 times now, most frequently with ag and food, obviously. But it's always about changes to legislation, changes to different acts that we see affecting the ability for farmers, processors to do their work, essentially. And it's been difficult. It's been challenging. And it's been incredibly busy over the last few years, much more so than before, just because of people's concerns about food security, food affordability. We try to bring reason to public debates. It hasn't been easy because a lot of people get it really emotional and they tend not to believe in data, but more their emotions. They think that one man or one company is responsible for their ills at the grocery store. It's a little bit more complicated than that. So we've been trying to bring forward a lot of data so people can better understand what's going on here.
Kind of introduced the topic very well there with what you do, and I think especially with the swine sector, and we've been hit hard quite a bit over the last couple of years. But seeing what's out there in the media about the agri-food sector and all that, and I'll start with, what is the state of the sector? I know that's a very broad question, but is it as bad as it seems to be if you look at what's in the news?
Well, it's not great. It's not great. And I think we all know that. Will it get better? I think it will. I mean, markets internationally are doing different things. And of course, the Canadian hog industry is just recalibrating. I'm actually going to be this fall back in Saskatchewan to talk to hog producers in the province. I've actually spoken to Manitoba, in Alberta, a couple of times, including the International Symposium in Banff. That was last fall. And yeah, a lot of people are nervous. A lot of people are concerned, and for obvious reasons. But I do think there are some really good opportunities out there, and essentially it has a lot to do with the fact that animal proteins are getting more expensive. When you look at the meat trifecta, for example, with beef, Well, beef is incredibly expensive. So there is this movement from beef to chicken. My hope is that there'll be more towards pork in general, and I've always said, and I've said that many times, that pork is not the forgotten child, but the underloved child of the meat trifecta. There's a lot you can do with pork, and but it hasn't been appreciated as much by certain markets, including Canada. So I think that there are some tremendous opportunities, but at the same time, of course, I mean, internationally, markets are shifting, and I'm thinking obviously about China and Asia in particular. So it's going to be like that for a while, and we have to kind of accept some of that momentum that may actually go against the models that we had before.
Yeah, I think it would be interesting to dive a little bit more into the consumer trends and what you're seeing, especially when you talk about cost. Because one thing that's been commented to me about people is that poultry is becoming so expensive. Like chicken is just outrageously so, right? So how much maybe does that price need to change before people start looking at pork more or alternatives? Where are you seeing the shifts now with consumer choice?
Yeah, as much as I think that pork is the unloved child, if you will, of the meat trifecta, chicken has been weird because, first of all, poultry is supply managed. One would expect prices to be pretty stable, or at least with inflation, you shouldn't see hikes. But it's been uneven across the country, depending on where you live in Canada. Some prices have actually skyrocketed. BC is the one example that I'm thinking about right now. You're seeing, I mean, right now the average price for a whole chicken is 30% lower than the average price you find in BC. 30%. And supply management is a national program. I think that some people have been spooked by chicken prices at different levels across the country. I would say that really, generally speaking, chicken remains affordable, but it depends where you live. And as soon as you spook a consumer, and this is really the danger of price volatility, and I've always said that price volatility is an even more dangerous thing than food inflation itself, because as soon as you spook a consumer, that consumer will walk away from that category for a very long time. And that category tends to be a desirable category from a health perspective, like pork, like chicken, like beef, like produce. I mean, all of these categories are quite volatile. And but over the last 3-4 years, they've been also spooking consumers. And that's why a lot of traffic has gone from the periphery of the store to the center of the store way more. And of course, losers are often the meat counter, the produce section of the grocery store. And so right now, the market is amazingly frugal, amazingly frugal. You should be seeing Canadians spend about $339 a month on food. That's basically our estimate for 2024. But the reality is very different. Right now, Canadians are spending about $234 a month. So that's a huge difference between what they should be spending and what they're actually spending. And of course, you have to think about nutritional compromises along the way. And they will actually be avoiding fresh, including, well, chicken, pork, and other fresh products.
Yes, it's interesting that you say that most are spending less than what you would anticipate, given the concerns that people are having with the cost of food and how much they're spending on food. So it almost seems to not really match up with that, right? So how or maybe it does in your estimate. So is it just that that it's a switch to what they're buying, or is the affordability things like an actual problem?
I think they're substituting for sure. They're trading down. They're trading down on fresh. They're trading down on brands. They're shifting sideways between categories. and fresh tends to lose, including meat. And so that's the thing about a traded down market. The thing about interest rates is that often we tend to, in the food business anyways, we tend to focus on prices, and we think that prices will impact behavior for a long time. But right now, what we're going through is way beyond just food. Food affordability has been impacted by the amount of disposable income that people actually have in their pockets when they're showing up at the grocery store. And so with 10 hikes, even with the recent cut, I'm not entirely convinced that people will actually see some relief, because over the next, I would say, so we're we're close to 5 years after the start of the pandemic. And if you recall, during the pandemic, at the start of the pandemic, a lot of people were moving, a lot of people were buying, and most mortgage agreements are signed based on 5-year terms. And so we actually expect that the vast majority of mortgages will be renegotiated within the next year or so. And if that's the case, you're likely to see a lot of households see their payments go way up. Okay, 45 to 50% of Canadians actually carry a mortgage. Households, I mean, not Canadians, but households. So we're going to see a lot of Canadians see their budget really being clobbered because of higher payments for mortgages, debt. A lot of people are in debt for a variety of reasons. So those are things that are going to impact the ability of people to spend more money at the grocery store. So it's not going to end now. It's going to last for a while. I'd say we're in this for about 2-3 years, which is why a lot of companies are ramping up their private labeling portfolio, like you see it with Loblaw, with Sobeys. Walmart in the United States just launched Better Goods. I'm expecting Better Goods to actually reach Canada at some point. Just because the market is so frugal. You're seeing some really strong numbers coming from Dollarama just this week. Those are signs. People are just looking at different places to buy food, generally speaking.
Yeah. So obviously, it's a much more complicated issue, but I'm going to ask the question anyway. Is the affordability based on one grocer? Like, is this one grocer, one person's problem who will remain nameless?
Oh yeah, absolutely. He's the reason why Germany had a 21% food inflation rate. I mean, seriously, it's just I've been actually quite disappointed as an academic in terms of the public discourse about food inflation, and media really has eaten it all up. They actually think that some of these boycotts were real. They're not real. I mean, they're just movements, and you have to pay attention to some of these movements, but they're not necessarily real. So essentially, what we're seeing here is a uneducated, misleading public discourse around food inflation, which is unfortunate, because I think there was an opportunity for people to learn about food systems, how things work. And if you talk to companies, if you talk to farmers, if you talk to processors, if you talk to anybody, they'll tell you things are different and things are costing more. It's costing more to do everything. And people don't necessarily understand why Ukraine affected Canada when it's so far away. And so they just think of greed. On Wednesday of this week, I was testifying before Parliament, before a committee, and this greed issue came up and it was raised by an NDP MP, and he asked me whether or not there was greed in the system, and I said, well, there's always going to be greed in the system, but how do you measure, greed in general? Like, how do you know? Is it 3%? Is it 2%? Like, how do you quantify it? And no one has actually ever quantified the issue. I actually think that in capitalism, you need greed, because greed will actually push people to innovate. will push people to do better, will push people to nurture efficiencies within the supply chain. But it can be overdone. I actually agree. I mean, at some point, you got to focus on a consumer. You got to focus on making sure that the consumer has access to affordable foods. But generally speaking, if you're in the food business, I think you're going to make sure that your food product is actually as affordable as possible because you want to remain competitive as much as possible. And so, but at the same time, we also need to recognize that there are some issues within the system. And I do think that there is abuse in the system. If you talk to suppliers, if you talk to certain companies, they will tell you that some grocers are abusive or even supply chain bullies. Terms that they actually ask suppliers to honor are, quite frankly, most of the times unreasonable, which really has put more pressure on suppliers and farmers as well. And that's why I've been advocating for a code of conduct for a very long time, because I think it would actually create a level playing field for everyone, which would actually allow farmers and suppliers to offer new products and allow the independent grocers to strive. Right now, what we're seeing is a big five selling the same products at different prices at different locations. You need more innovation. In order to do that, you want to make sure that everyone actually allows the supply chain to do its job from an innovative perspective.
Yeah, so it's interesting you mentioned the code of conduct, because my next question was going to be about government policies and other potential legislation and stuff that either has gone through or you're seeing come in, right, and how that may positively or negatively affect the sector. And along those lines, when we see what's happening in the EU, in Netherlands and Germany, and restrictions on agriculture and stuff like that, like, is that a sign of what's to come, or like, how do you view that?
I would say, well, I mean, first of all, there's a lot to unpack here.
I know, big question.
Yeah, so let's start with the code of conduct. I actually think right now there's some pushback from groups, especially out west, thinking that this is about government intervening into the market. We should leave the market alone. Market conditions shouldn't be altered. The code of conduct is not about that. It's not about government intervention. It's about disciplining the market. That's really what it is. It's allowing the industry to talk to itself. Because right now, nobody's talking. Loblaw comes in with specific terms. Walmart comes in with specific terms. You either walk away from your number one client or you basically just take the hit. There's no democracy in the system right now because, I mean, some of these companies are incredibly powerful and you can't do business without them. So I think that needs to be addressed by governments. And that's why we need a voluntary code with the participation of all grocers. So that's one thing that I wanted to address. Now, to your point about the EU and about geopolitics and everything that's going on here politically, I mean, I must say that I've been incredibly concerned about some of the things that has come out of the EU in particular in the last several months, and so that's why I'm not surprised. I've seen many farmers go out and express their anger. They basically lost control of their farms. I mean, you have satellite images being sent to them and notes sent to farmers asking them to be compliant towards what they're growing, what they're doing on their farms, and things like that. I mean, it really has gone way too far. And I think that we need to trust farmers way more than that. They are, in my view, the most important environmental stewards that we have in the system. They need nature. They need the environment in order to do business. And so we need to trust that moral contract that we have with farmers as much as possible. And that's not what I'm seeing in the EU. I'm seeing distrust. I'm seeing basically urban-centric policies undermining our farmers' authority. And as soon as you do that, you become food insecure over time. And we're already seeing it with Grain production, we are expecting, some experts in Europe are expecting grain production to be lower, much lower than their 5-year average. Hogs, Europe is exporting fewer hogs now. And who's benefiting from that? The United States. The United States right now are exporting more hogs to Asia because, or in Korea in particular, because Europe has lost the ability to produce more, to become an agri-food economic influencer, basically. And so you can see that really slowly Europe's influence in agri-food is eroding because of some of these really misguided policies that caters to the eco-anxious folks, who would not trust farmers. They've never been on farms. They never have probably spoken to farmers. So I was glad to see the outcome on Sunday, seeing some parties who do support farmers way more explicitly gain more seats. Now, I'm not sure if it was enough. I'll be honest with you. I don't think it was enough. But I do think that some of the panic that is coming out of France, for example, is warranted. Macron's bet to call an election is actually going to attract more attention to this issue, I think. Because, I mean, let's face it, in the EU, 2 countries matter: Germany and France. From an ag perspective, you need to pay attention to those 2 countries. And in those 2 countries, we have seen some significant changes last Sunday, which is I think desirable. So with elections coming up in France on June 30th and July 7th, I actually do think that Macron's bet is quite risky because I mean, he's basically telling the right, here's a rope and hang yourself. You got 3 years, so I can actually be reelected as a president in 2027. Honestly, I'm not sure it's going to happen, to be honest. I actually think that really people will express their anger and will likely vote the same way as they did last Sunday.
Yeah. So spend a lot of time, I think, talking about challenges. So maybe I'll ask you to look into your crystal ball a little bit, looking into the future. What are some opportunities that we could take advantage of, either the sector as a whole or, the pig sector specifically?
Well, I mean, I think the opportunity is not at the center of the plate. I actually do think that for pork in particular, you have to look at, what's around the plate. In the agri-food sector, the battle has always been the center of the plate. So we need to be at the center of the plate. We need to, it's that stomach share mentality, food is no longer a zero-sum game. There's more to it than that. It's complicated out there. People are trying different things. Your job as an industry is to get in there somehow, but not necessarily at the center of the plate. You want to be, in the periphery. You want to be a complementary ingredient to something, something fashionable, and you got to get on social media. I mean, I'm on social media myself, and I can't believe how little I hear about pork. On Instagram, on TikTok, on any platform, really. I think it's important for the pork industry. I'm not going to say hogs because hogs are very far for consumers, but for pork, you really need to be out there and engaging with the public as much as possible.
Wrap more things in bacon. Maybe that'll be the the solution.
Everything is better with bacon, even chocolate.
Even exactly. Chocolate. If you can make chocolate better.
Last week I actually ate bacon covered chocolate covered bacon, and I tried honey. But I gotta say, I was a little bit skeptical with chocolate, dark chocolate. It was unbelievable.
Yeah, I've had it. It's very good. So bacon is good if you can make chocolate better. So
you can actually make chocolate better with pork and bacon.
There we go.
Come on.
Our new slogan
That's
for the pork
that's
industry.
a TikTok tagline right there.
I love it. Okay, before we get to our final three questions, I'll just ask you to summarize today's episode in a message.
I think really the pork industry needs a renaissance, like a real one, from farm gate to plate. I think I know that when you meet with producers, when you meet with some folks in the industry, they don't necessarily feel great about prospects. I actually feel good about prospects. I think there are great opportunities for pork in the future, but you need positioning. You need a strategy. Yeah, you need to connect with the consumer a lot more, especially the younger consumers, millennials and Gen Zs. Pork relied on the older generation for a very long time. Boomers are slowly fading away economically. They're eating less. There are few boomers by the day, and they're eating less. So you have to look at the younger generations. How are you going to connect with them in particular? And how are you going to make pork relevant to them? I think that's the most important thing, because pork really missed an opportunity with boomers, and they still got away with it. I mean, a lot of people cooked the crap out of pork for decades. It was tasteless. It was disgusting. Now we went through a few decades telling people how to cook pork properly. So people have started to appreciate pork as a really great source of protein. But the younger generations, they need to understand what's the value add here for them as a nutrient, as a really viable animal protein source.
Great message.
It's time for our famous three. Working with nature and not against it, piglets fed AX3 see significant and improved feed efficiency. Producers know the reality of needing to reduce antibiotic and zinc use. AX3 Digest is a highly digestible novel protein that promotes improved in-barn performance, piglet health, and minimizes the need for zinc in the diet. For more information, visit www.protecta.com. That's www.protecta.com.
Okay, so our final three questions we ask every guest on the show. Our first question is your favorite swine-related or agriculture-related resource?
Resource, like for information, you mean?
For information, yeah, something that you kind of your go-to.
Well, it boils down to some cooking. I'll make a plug for one of my good friends, Last Request Barbecue. Last Request Barbecue is a YouTube show that is hosted by Michael LeBlanc, who's my producer for my own podcast. But he uses a lot of pork, ribs, and every time he does a show with a cut of pork, it makes me want to do the same. Like he does a good job selling pork a lot, I think. So yeah, it's an inspirational source of information as a cook, as a father, as a consumer, as an academic. I'd say, I mean, it's hard. I stick to some of my news sites in general, but I wouldn't say that there's one side only focused on the pork industry that I actually relate to right now.
No, I like that one. Cook more pork. I'm always looking for ways to do that. So
exactly, yeah.
Okay, our next question maybe will be a little bit easier. Is a favorite book? This is wide open, so it can be anything.
Actually, my first English book was Animal Farm. Yeah, an Animal Farm, if you've read it, it is the story of animal farms kicking out the farmer. So it's basically goes back to the Bolshevik revolution of 1917, and pigs take over the farm. They're the people taking over the farms, directing animals to do different work, which is really fascinating. But when I started my academic career way back when, I started to look at different issues related to animal farming. But I was in Quebec, and the pig industry was really big, and we started to look at different virtues. And frankly, that's when I started to appreciate how pigs are similar to humans, and reflecting on Animal Farm, how they could lead and be very smart. They can actually do wonders. The connection between humans and pigs is very strong. And of course, as you know, we've seen medicine look into the virtues of pig, of porcine parts, like animal parts, to be transplanted into humans as well. And if you look at the pig embryo, very small embryo, it looks a lot like a human embryo, if you can imagine. And so there's a lot of, to me, the pigs have always been quite fascinating. And frankly, you can actually generate a lot of animal proteins in a very small time. It's one of the most efficient animal proteins out there. And I've always been fascinated by that. Anyways, yeah.
Oh, good book, good message.
So it's from a francophone learning English to becoming an academic and going back to pigs and how they can actually play all sorts of roles in our economy and our lives. Really, it's been fascinating.
Oh, great. So our final question is a characteristic that you think that all successful leaders share?
Listening. Yeah, listening. That's really the big one that is often underappreciated. People think of leaders as being, confident, but I think it's important to listen nowadays because nobody listens to each other.
Yeah. No, very good.
It's all about noise.
Yeah, I think that one comes up every third podcast as a characteristic. Yeah, it's a very big one. Sylvain, it's been great having you on the show. I think a lot of good information, great messages. So thank you again for joining us.
My pleasure.